WNST, for anyone that is a Baltimore baseball fan and an Orioles fan, and you are listening to a conversation between two long dyed-in-the-wools. I turned 50 this year. Luke's been at this now professionally for going on a decade and running around with the Orioles, and I've had my media pass taken away for 12 years through all of this, and I've decided to write a Dear Orioles series. Sort of conceptualized this back in May when the season was clearly not going to exist this summer. I think we knew, Luke, early on that this was going to be a strange year of transition given where Buck Showalter and Dan Duquette were, where they are with Manny Machado, where they are with Adam Jones and Zach Britton and Brad Brock. But little did we know we would be talking about a team playing sub-300 ball into the middle of summer and this breakup. And I'm writing about this on a daily basis. And full disclosure, I'm trying to think of it as a baseball columnist role. And Jason Lockenfor and I were having a long conversation about this at the Ravens training camp in early June. And, if you're a columnist and you're taking this apart piece by piece, and I've sat here and watched this for 30 years, so has Lockenfor. You have mainly as a fan, but going back to your childhood, quite frankly, when Camden Yards was just opening up now, and all the promise of the franchise and where we are, where it sits here in 2018, and what it's garnered for the fan base, for our investment as taxpayers in building a stadium, and what Angelos has made on it, what the public has made on it, where our expectations are, and how ugly this is going to be over the next 6 months, if not the next 6 years. I've started to sort of take stock and say, if I'm going to write a series of letters to individuals in the franchise as a stakeholder, as a fan, as a vested citizen, as someone who owns a sports radio station here and loves sports and loves the Orioles and did Free the Birds and all the good and the bad and the ugly and 30 ballparks in 30 days and my last name and the Hall of Fame and all the other stuff that goes on, I really do sort of take stock at 50 and say, what does a franchise owe the community? So my first letter is not to Peter Angelos, it's not to John Angelos or Brady Angelos or Buck or Dan or Chris Davis, who's making all the money, or Machado, who's going to be gone in a few weeks. But Luke, my first letter is, Dear Orioles, dear franchise, dear whomever owns the team, whether it's Jerry Hoffberger or whoever's running the team, whether it's Larry Lucchino or a Marty Conway or a Dick Cass, that would be running a football team, but to the organization, to the institution itself. And I'm going to, throw it your way because I'm going to have my thoughts that are going to be based a lot on these conversations as I take notes to say to you, to the community, to Twitter, to anybody out there that loves the Orioles, what do the Orioles owe Baltimore? What do they owe the fans? Let's start with that because what we expected of Peter's not going to be here much longer. So, what the Nationals fans expect of the Lerner family is they handed from a 92-year-old patriarch down what we as Ravens fans expected from Art to Steve and whatever that next thing's going to be after Steve. What do we expect of the Orioles, brother?
Well, I think it comes down to this, and it's very simple. A good product. And now, that can mean a lot of different things. I think most people that are in the format listening to us, and certainly what we do for a living, talking about games on a night-in and night-out basis, you equate that to winning, and certainly that's a big part of the pie. There's no doubt about it. But that goes into affordability.
Well, that should be the ultimate goal, right? Winning,
sure,
and winning the right way, and being a good community partner, and being fair with your. I mean, look at what the Capitals are going through now. The level of expectation when you win now, right? Everybody wants to touch the cup. Everybody's there. They're all going to be there forever. They might if you treat them right, but certainly this is the time where they're reaching out to try to become the Red Sox for the next 15 years, where they just have this built-in thing where everybody loves them. The Ravens have tried that. Boy, we haven't lived through that with the Orioles, right? Like in the 80s we did, but it's been a long time since the brand itself is so beloved that it can withstand losing, right?
Sure, and I think that's the case for most sports franchises. When you're especially when you're talking about an extended period of losing, or specifically when you're dealing with the micro of one season like this one where the Orioles have been in that 25 to 30 below 500 range before you even get to the All-Star break, long before you get to the All-Star break, it's going to be difficult to keep anyone engaged. But from a big picture standpoint, can you have a good product? Can you win? Can you field a winning product? And when I say win, that doesn't mean just championships, because, my goodness, if your standard is to win a championship and that's the only satisfaction you're going to get out of following a team, well, you're going to be really, really disappointed, and you're going to be really, really miserable for most of your life, because even the Yankees, who are the Yankees, and yes, they've won so many championships, they don't win every year. And,
well, I was going to say the Capitals lost a lot of fans over the last 20 years by not winning. They all came running back to the parade, though.
Right. Well, and there's always going to be some of that, no matter who the team is.
Right, of course.
Sure. But that beyond that, while acknowledging that you're not going to win the World Series or the Super Bowl or the Stanley Cup every single year, how competitive are you on a yearly basis? How are you winning? Are you in it? And that goes back to the entertainment value of your product. I mean, the Orioles were very compelling from 2012 through 2016, and they didn't win a World Series. They got the closest they got was being 4 wins away to get to a World Series in 2014. But they were compelling over that time. Why? Because they were competitive, because they were in contention for most of that stretch of time. And I'm not saying that's the bare-bones standard either necessarily, but that's what you should have in mind. And I think the Ravens are a good example of this from about 1999 through the present. You can count on one hand the number of years where they haven't been all that competitive, and that's a 2-decade period right there. That's pretty good. And that's not to say they're perfect either, but to go back to your original question, how much entertainment value is in the product, knowing that winning is going to be the overwhelming large one there, but what's the experience like going to the ballpark? I mean, they have a jewel of a ballpark in and of itself. We've talked about that at length. They've certainly marketed that, with 20th anniversary, 25th anniversary. So they've tried to do that. But what's the overall experience like? And clearly winning is a big part of that, but there are other things, like affordability. What's the game day experience like? You mentioned their role in the community. These are all things that should matter, and is there a perfect formula there as far as how often you win a championship? I don't know. I mean, you have a lot of people that loved the Cubs in Chicago for a long time, despite the fact that they hadn't won a World Series in over a century. And I think, as much as they were lovable losers, there was still something about them still being the fabric of that community there, despite not winning. So I think that shows that it can transcend and it can be more than just winning. But overall, do people feel more positive about your existence and your being in their community than the negative? And there's always going to be negative. You're going to have missteps. I just mentioned the Ravens as a positive example. The Ravens have had missteps.
Well, there are organizations, and sure. The Orioles certainly one of them. As I sit here with a Free the Birds hat, people should be angry about the way the Orioles have been run here from the very, very beginning. They should be angry about the way this has gone down. They should be, if they really knew, if the common guy on the street knew just how much money Peter has put in his pocket and in his family's pocket over the last 12 years while putting this thing together and playing baseball games and locking the fans out during the middle of a riot with tanks circling the ballpark, which I witnessed. All the things that happen here that could be positive or negative, people here could really, really be angry at the Orioles the way they are at the creeps that own the Florida Marlins all those years, where or the creep that owned the Clippers, at that point where they had to get rid of the team and the league sort of had to liquidate and sell off to Ballmer because Sterling had become someone they couldn't have around, and what Jerry Richardson's withstood down in Charlotte here this last year of transition. So there is a point where you get thrown off the deck or you're so hated that you have to move or you have to do something. That's never really been the case here with the people that are pissed at the Orioles still go. The bad years, you sucked it up for 12 years at the beginning of the century. I don't know that winning is the most important thing they do around there. That's pretty obvious. I think it's a thing, but it's not the thing. And I don't think they really knew how to win. I mean, Peter wanted to win when he spent all that money. But when you don't win, then everything else is sort of like you're hypersensitive to all of it. The price, how hot the hot dogs are, how bad the parking is, the crime in the neighborhood, is my seat good or bad, can my kid get an autograph? All of that matters a lot more when you're not winning, and a whole lot more when you're losing like this. I mean, there's not winning, which is what they were last year, and then there's what they are this year, which is a whole different level of why am I getting in the car and going down there? And it's not for winning. So it better be for literally everything else, right? Whatever that giveaway is, or whatever the person you're meeting, or the weather. I mean, who's pitching? If Bundy's pitching, I don't know, but they better have something that brings them in. And then there's what are they going to do for next year and beyond? And I really think we need to go back to what are they as a brand? And I guess that's where I'm beginning this to say, because Boog Powell and Brooks and all that, okay, that's not helping them sell a ticket next year anymore. I don't think Cal Ripken's helping them sell a ticket anymore, as relevant as Cal still feels to many of us. That's so far gone from the mind of, I'm going to go down there and pay $20 to sit on the roof and wear my Cal Ripken throwback jersey because I think of Dad. I think less and less and less people do it for that reason anymore. I really do. I don't know why they go, but I don't think it's because of the 66 Orioles anymore. You know what I mean?
Sure, and but I don't know where that is really true anywhere when you're not winning. I mean, right? I mean, I
saw Kurt Schilling do a nostalgia thing with the Phillies, like he's on my Facebook page, him and his wife Shonda, and they had a 25th anniversary of the '93 team that didn't win but got to the World. And I don't know that any of that, the old timers guy, I don't know that matters to 22-year-old baseball fans, and I don't think it's ever going to matter again for anyone that's going to lure. Ken Burns' baseball piece is not buying the next fan that wants to see colorized video Stan Musial the way I did. I mean, I don't know what's going to suck the next fan in, but the first thing is why do I want to go down there? Why does it matter to me? It says Baltimore on it. Why do I want to go give this family my money and do 4 hours at the ballpark and become an Oriole fan? Not for you or me, we're in, but then for us, what gets me back? What do they owe me,
Well, and I honestly think that's a difficult question around baseball at this point. And, we've talked so much about pace of play. We've talked so much about television, HD TV, and all of that. But one of the big challenges for the Orioles, for baseball in general, is growing the game. Now, I'll give the Orioles credit with some of the measures that they have taken in recent years. I can tell you there was an announced crowd of $20,000 back or 20,000 people on Father's Day. Not much, certainly, but there were a whole slew of kids running the bases. There is value to that from a future standpoint. How much? I have no idea. I'm not going to begin to guess what percentage of those kids who get to run around the bases at Camden Yards after a Sunday home game are going to be season ticket holders 20 years from now. But I think there's a minimal cost to doing that with potential gains. Now, it's not that alone. It's not letting kids 9 and under get in free with an adult alone, but those are the kind of measures you take. And I think with where the Orioles are right now from a marketing standpoint, you almost have to treat this like you're a minor league team. And, I mean, think about it. No one really goes to a minor league baseball game because you love that team, unless you live in that community and there isn't Major League Baseball within – a 2.5, 3 hour drive?
Well, like I used to, I went to dinner one time with Ben McDonald in Toronto. And, Ben grew up in Louisiana, and we all love Ben. We all, agree. I had given Ben my childhood memories of, seeing him pitch at Memorial Stadium and where I was in Ocean City the first night he came out of the bullpen and, talking about my childhood and going out to 33rd Street and getting on the bus. And he said, man, that's unbelievable. I only went to one Major League Baseball game my whole childhood. I said, really? He said, my daddy put me in the car. We drove to the Astrodome one time, and I saw a game. I don't know, we played the Reds or somebody, And he said, I saw one game in my life. and before I pitched in a game. And I'm like, wow, like that, that was unthinkable to me and to you and people that live here or people
Sure.
live in Washington. But if you live in, Wheeling, West Virginia, it's not that easy for sure.
Sure, but it just goes to my point, though, when you're so bad and there's nothing short-term from a wins and losses standpoint that matters, you need to go above and beyond. And they've done some of those things.
Like what you're saying is every kid needs to get to a ball game in order to have an impact. Like literally every summer. And I know they do that thing with Channel 13. They do the weather day, and I see all the buses downtown, and they're all gone by the fourth inning. And usually the weather stinks quite, But and I remember safety day. I was, the day that Gary Renicky took the Larry and the Grove pitch to his chin. That was safety day for me in 1979. I was out there with all my friends with my little badge on and stuff. So, I mean, I get all of that, but what's the real impact? I'm writing about this to some degree. I think lacrosse has been a bit of a snakefish, right? Or what's that Japanese fish they put in the water here that eats all the other fish? And it's snakefish, I think, right? Is that what it's called? But either way, I think lacrosse has been that. Lacrosse has sort of usurped baseball, specifically in our community, in a way that it hasn't in Boston, where they played hockey and whatever, or other communities, Chicago or whatever, where baseball and Wrigley Field and all that. In this community specifically to Baltimore, in the era of Cal Ripken and Aberdeen, and lacrosse has grown so much during Peter Angelos' ownership here that has been another massive force in our community that has literally sucked a lot of the fish out of the pond for all of it, because, John Harbaugh last week was talking about, his kid plays lacrosse. I was with Gene Ubriaco. His kid played lacrosse, and his kid is now 40 years old coaching lacrosse. And, we see football, the Ravens in this modern era. And we talk about Biff Poggi and what's going on, with that thing here, that a lot of kids play football in this community. That in the 70s, every Timmy Norris and Cal Ripken and Tim Nordbrook, and I'm going through all the Bill Ripkins, all the local kids we had here played baseball because that's what we did in the 70s here. But we didn't think about lacrosse then or any of these other things, and I think that's a uniquely Baltimore thing.
Yeah, and I think there's merit to that, but then at the same time, does that mean we're going to see a Major League Lacrosse league that's wildly successful 20 years from now? I'm really skeptical of that.
In the middle of the World Cup, I'd say the same thing about soccer. And
right.
All these kids play soccer, but then when it comes time, who's still playing soccer, right?
So I hear exactly what you're saying, and I don't disagree with it. But if you're Major League Baseball, if you're the Orioles specifically, I'm not exactly sure what you do to combat that. I think some of this just has to do with changing times in general. I mean, my goodness, as a former educator, it's been talked about for years for wellness for kids playing video games, kids that aren't playing sports. You mentioned kids that aren't playing baseball and they're playing something else. There are lots of kids that aren't as active in general. So what does that mean for the future of professional sports? I don't know. These are really pie-in-the-sky, big, long-term issues that are societal as much as anything else, but specifically for the Orioles, I think you just have to provide as many forums for positive experiences as you can. And like I said, I think winning is still the biggest trump card, but again, what kind of experiences are you able to create, and how visible are your players? Again, these aren't necessarily lessons that are unique to the Orioles. I think they're applicable for any sports team in any league, but I think that's a big challenge that we're finding now because, in general, we're becoming less of a social society in terms of interaction, face-to-face, so much of it's social
we
media.
Can get a lot of juice and keep a lot of relationship on text, on FaceTime, on a phone call, that we don't have to write letters so much anymore. We don't have to show up and have a beer to feel close to our buddy who was on the other side of the country if we were Caps fans celebrating, because we celebrated together like you're in the room. So, I see and feel all that, and I think we feel that in every way when it comes to large gatherings, whether it's going to concerts, going to movies, going to ball games, going to street festivals, feet on the street. My dear friend Nancy does over here in Towson every week, just trying to get people. I saw that guy with the bat at the Braves game, keeping it off the kid's head when the kid's head was down on the. I see all that stuff. By the way, Luke Jones is here. I am in the Dear Orioles series, and I'm questioning Luke amongst many other people. I'm going to be writing about this. The Dear Orioles series will be each an individual, a letter to many, many people in the organization over the next 6 weeks, individual letters from me to them with very personal thoughts, some of them never before shared, and some of them widely shared and widely viewed. But I really want to begin this, and this is the beginning of the discussion, to say, if you're writing to the organization and it doesn't have a head that says Peter Angelos or Buck or Manny, or it only has the history of what it is, which is the little bird on the hat, and let's say Peter dies tomorrow, the kids sell the team to someone, Group X, owner Y, pick your billionaire, Tom Clancy comes back from the dead and he wants to own the team, whatever it is, right? Movie star, I don't know. What do they change? What's the first thing that, if this thing were baked again and someone took over this team in the summer of 2019, and they put Cal Ripken in charge? I'm making that up. They go hire the best baseball guy, and they go hire Ned Colletti, right, which they've been talking. And they throw Brady Anderson out the side door, and everything that ever existed before. Nestor, here's your press pass back. Cal, you're a part of the organization. Brooks, we have a suite for you, and you're here, and we're going to bring everybody back into the boat, and we're going to go recruit in Highlandtown and Dundalk and get people back from the stoop, and we're going to bring John Miller back. I don't know. I don't know what that elixir is, but at some point, someone not named Angelos, maybe, hopefully, will be running this place, and I don't know what we expect of that person or those people in regard to the brand and in regard to how terminally pissed off I am about the way I've been treated, my wife, my family, you, on behalf of you, other employees I've had, people I've known, friends I've had, business people in the community. I'm furious on behalf of all of them, in all the same ways that I'm furious about what's going on Pennsylvania Avenue over the last 18 months, just on the side of decency and on the side of how my mother told me to treat people and how I've tried to live my life over half a century, and returning phone calls and being honorable and being accountable and being honest and trying to be as transparent as you can be without being, hurting yourself or hurting others. I've just been appalled by all of it. All of that being said, that's the damage unto me and onto others, and we all have mixed emotions about what we expect from them. But if someone took the thing over, I don't know what the first step would be. And that's what Dear Orioles and Dear John Angelos and Peter would be about, because we're not charging Chris Davis or Adam Jones or Buck Showalter or Dan Duquette or Rick Dempsey with fixing any of that. But at the end, Dick Cass is sort of responsible for all that with the Ravens. And in the end, Steve Bisciotti is very responsible when Ray Rice cold cocks his girlfriend, and when you can't go to training camp in Westminster, and when guys take a knee at Wembley. I mean, all of that goes to Steve and Dick specifically. In this organization, I don't know who it goes to, but at some point it's going to go to someone not named Angelos. And I'm really wondering, when they come in and do the case study on how to make this better, where they really begin with the fans and with the community, because I think the local part that they try to do with the crabs and the Ain't This Baseball and all of that, I think it's really lost on sort of the old world Baltimore thing from what the city was 25 years ago and what it's going to be over the next 10 years, to try to make people that don't identify with Boog Powell want to come down there and start a relationship with the Orioles, want to become a baseball fan, or in my case, become one again.
Yeah, and look, I mean, this is such a loaded question. First of all, you can't chase ghosts. You can't go back and fix you can't unfire John Miller 20 years ago. You know, you can't do those things. So I think that has to be understood. as far as expectations for anyone who comes in, whether you're talking potential new ownership in the future, whether it's president of baseball ops, GM, manager, players that haven't even been drafted by the Orioles yet, whoever. So there's an acknowledgement there. But for me, and I think this kind of goes with what we were talking about a few minutes ago, but you need to get more cutting edge, and I mean that on so many different levels. I think from a fan engagement standpoint, you need to stop being so archaic when it comes to streaming your games. We know that the Orioles and the Nats, and I guess the Dodgers, I believe, were that other holdover here over the last couple years. All other teams allow you to stream games, and when as much as you're talking about, we were just talking about trying to get young people. That is such a. It's all about your phone. It's all about your iPad, your tablet. That's what people are using now for entertainment. So that's part of it. But then to get on the baseball side of things, I think this team, we've spent so much time talking about the lack of participation on the international market. And as much as some people might just look at that at first blush and say, "Oh yeah, that's really unwise," look at how this game is changing. And as much as we're trying to see how to engage more people in Baltimore with baseball and the Orioles specifically, but meanwhile, Major League Baseball has become such a global game on so many levels. And this isn't something that happened overnight, but it was so striking to me. And I said this to you last year when we were down in Miami for the All-Star game, and they even had all the flags of all the different players representing their respective teams in this All-Star game. And to think that the Orioles are dead last by a wide margin in international spending, again, it just, where are you? Where are you going right now with your franchise if you're going to just deliberately sit out such a sizable portion of the talent pool? And that's not to say that there aren't great players to be had in the amateur draft. I mean, the Orioles have found some great players in the amateur draft over the last 10 years. But to just sit that part of it out, to me it just screams of being antiquated and set in old ways that aren't going to be good enough anymore. I'll take that a step further, and analytics. Dan Duquette isn't someone that's completely analytically challenged by any stretch. He was a guy who did more with less in Montreal 20-plus years ago, and he wasn't someone that didn't use sabermetrics in Boston, but their next hire, and you mentioned Ned Colletti, and he was rumored to be interviewed recently by the Orioles.
And I have a feeling that'll go on for a little while.
Yeah,
and
right? we don't know what capacity. I mean, for all we know, they're simply trying to solicit feedback from people that are experienced, and I'm not even saying that's a bad thing to do. Certainly, it's not a good look when you have a current GM in place, at least by title, officially speaking, but whoever is the next person that is, whether you're talking ownership or whoever's running baseball ops, and again, if it were me getting to decide that, it'd be someone more cutting edge in that regard. And that's not to say the Orioles haven't had some cutting edge elements. They were one of the first teams that went nuts on infield shifting 5-6 years ago. So it's not
they were the first one with note cards with Earl Weaver in the dugout.
Right. I mean, so it's not as though that stuff has been completely non-existent, but it hasn't been emphasized enough.
Well, Moneyball's 20 years old, and they still haven't played that game yet, right?
Right, literally. Right. But I'd like to see the Orioles not have one of the smaller analytics staffs in baseball. I'd like to see them be on more of the cutting edge in that regard. I want to see them spend internationally. I want to see them be cutting edge in terms of how they market themselves through streaming games. I mean, to answer your question, and I know I've kind of gone on and on about it.
Well, that's what the idea is, to go on and on.
Get younger and more cutting edge in how you attack baseball ops, how you attack scouting and developing and picking players, and how you market your product. And I'm not saying that's going to fix all of their issues, but boy, I think that would really get them on a better start to win more over the long haul and not have to hope you just make a series of really good moves over a 3 or 4 year period and set yourself up for a 5-year window, which is essentially what happened. And they get credit for that, but to have long-term sustainability as far as being a contender. And that does not mean you have to have the highest payroll in baseball either. It's not about spending the most. It's about spending wisely and using your resources to maximize them. The Orioles don't. They had a payroll up over $150 million, well over $150 million a year ago. Take some of that and just don't be last in international spending. Try to be middle of the pack in that regard, and you'd be surprised if you couple that with competent drafting, what kind of talent pool you can start to build up.
Well, you also have to have scouts that are competent, and one of the things that's gone on here, Machado, Wieters, Markakis, sort of the blue chip guys. This organization has not spit out a whole lot of Major League ball players through the middle that didn't look more like Mike Wright than looking more like Chris Tillman. And Chris Tillman didn't come to this organization. He was sort of fleeced over, as was Chris Davis and Adam Jones and a lot of the other good parts of this organization. They were blue chippers that they paid a lot of money to, that they didn't draft in the era of Beatty and Flanagan because the owner wouldn't let them draft those Scott Boras players and the players that wouldn't play for slot or wouldn't sign for slot in the first round, which is why they had a bunch of turds for a decade around here to begin with. But now that we're into sort of the modern part of this, you have to look at the organization and say, what has the organization produced that has been a major league talent outside of like Jonathan Scope? I mean, I don't even know what else you would. Bundy, I mean, was a blue chip guy. I mean, when you're drafting first round guys and they get to the big leagues, I don't know that you could pat yourself on the back as an organization. But at some point, you have to have some thirds, some fifths, some sevenths, some 14ths get into the lineup and play 5 years in your organization. And this team doesn't do that. This franchise hasn't done that in 30 years.
They've done some of it, but not nearly enough. There's no question about that. I mean, if you actually look at their roster the last couple of years, they've had some homegrown guys that haven't necessarily all been first-round picks. I mean, you mentioned Scope. Trey Mancini's not having a good year this year, but had a really good rookie year, and I'm still not at all ready to give up on him being a really, a good major league player. Probably not an all-star, not an MVP candidate, but good. And you need guys that are solid and good. So,
they also gave away a guy that went somewhere else and won a Cy Young, too. So, that happened. You can look at Rodriguez. Well, we saw him pitch 2 weeks ago. You can look at Dave. You can go at the guys that they had in the organization that they were sort of half fleeced of. They didn't give away nothing for Andrew Miller. They gave away a real guy. And, a guy that's pitched and making starts and in the big leagues. And, so they've had some guys. I mean, they've had guys that other organizations have coveted and turned into something, right, to some degree.
Right. And I'd look at their bullpen right now. I mean, Zach Britton was a homegrown guy. He wasn't a top 3 pick or anything like that. Now, did he become the starting pitcher they envisioned him being originally? No, but it beats the alternative of Brian Mattis being picked in the top 5, and he's out of the majors now. So, so there's going to be a lot of there's a lot of volatility when you're talking about picking players. Even the best franchises, the best farm systems, there's a lot of failure that goes into that. But that goes back to my point about the international market. You need to give yourself more lottery tickets. I mean, that's really what this comes to be. You pick players and you develop them. And I haven't mentioned this because I've spent so much time talking about the international market and analytics. They need to get better with developing talent. They need to be more consistent. I think there was a period several years ago where there was more consistency level to level in developing players, and I think that's gone by the wayside. And I've heard more and more that it's not as consistent level to level, and that's where you end up having pitchers who go elsewhere and have more success. It's not that the Orioles didn't identify talent correctly. They didn't know what to do with it. So, it's kind of an all-encompassing thing. There isn't some point A to point B roadmap. There are so many tentacles to building a successful organization in any sport. You can't just be a good drafting team in the NFL. You do have to, you got to augment your roster and complement your roster with free agent signings. So it's not as though there's some end-all, be-all perfect formula. You have to be willing to participate, though, and exhaust every avenue, and that's where the Orioles, despite the fact that they have increased their spending over the last 5 years on major league payroll, that's where it's been so frustrating because they haven't exhausted every avenue collectively to not just be good, but to sustain it. And they're at this the window that they were in for 5 years, where they did win and they were competitive and they made the playoffs 3 times and they won 96 games back in 2014. That window slammed shut, and the reason why it slammed shut is, when you have a finite amount of major league talent that you find, but you're not pumping enough on the back end of that to continue that to the point when a couple guys leave via free agency, you don't have 3 or 4 other guys potentially ready to step in, knowing that they're not all going to make it. It's a pipeline. It's a system. The NFL is so great about this because of the cap structure. What do we always talk about in the NFL? You have those very select few guys that are second contract guys. Most of the players you draft, even the ones that are pretty successful, they played for you for 4 years.
Well, I mean, I talk about this all the time. I mentioned Arrieta leaving and what a high crime that is, and the high crime of Messina leaving, and the high crime of what Machado's about to do too. But in football, they've lost pieces all along the way. I mean, every year they're losing an Asemele or a Wagner or a Jensen or whatever. You can't have that in baseball, man. You can't be losing every Markakis and Wieters and Jones. The Orioles tried that back in the 70s, losing every Don Baylor and every Bobby Grich, and that you can't have somebody come and take all the best players out of your organization. I mean, look at Tampa, right? Like that just doesn't work. That's a short-term play, man.
Sure, but the point. But you're also not going to be in a position where you spend at all costs to keep everyone. The Orioles have kept guys. They have, and one of the big problems is they kept Chris Davis. So you have to understand that there's a fine balance here. And I was using the football stamp analogy more so because you want to have enough volume and quality in your farm system that you can endure those losses. I mean, I think back to the amount of immediate outrage that was there when the Cardinals let Albert Pujols go. They absolutely made the right decision there. I mean, Albert Pujols is a guy who still has multiple years left on his deal and is a sub-replacement kind of player at this point because, he can't play defense. And he's not near the hitter.
And by the way, this is on the back end of Hamilton, another crappy deal, and on the back end of Ohtani, who his arm might fall. I mean, they're the Washington Redskins of baseball, right? They go for the splash.
But this goes back to my point as far as wanting to be more cutting edge. If you told me right now, which would I rather see the Orioles do, have the highest payroll in baseball or have a top 5 farm system, I'm going to take the top 5 farm system because if you have a good enough pipeline, you can cycle players in, and it's not as dramatic as the NFL with the salary cap because you don't have a salary cap, but you do have a payroll. You do have some amount of financial limitations anywhere. Now, the Yankees are way up at the top. The Dodgers are way up at the top, and then you have your bottom of the market, franchises that are either tanking or they have no one at all supporting them, and they're in the smallest market. Everyone does have some level of financial limitations. Some of those are artificial, and then you do get to a point where Oakland doesn't have any way that they could spend $200 million. I mean, it's just not feasible. But my point is, you have a farm system and player development. You prioritize that. You have a scouting staff that's both volume and quality. You spend internationally. You allocate proper resources for the draft. You're willing to sign guys over slot. All those different things. And again, that's kind of an all-encompassing thing. That's where you get to a point where you're not feeling that you have to overpay to keep player A if you don't feel it's the best investment. But you want it to be a combination of those things. Yeah, you don't want to be a bottom 5 payroll team in baseball. No one wants that. Billy Beane doesn't want that in Oakland. To be very clear, as much as he's been idolized by the analytics community for going on a decade and a half now. But you want to have that balance there. And I think we saw the Yankees were a great example of this, not now, but 4 or 5 years ago. They were still one of the top, if not the highest payroll in baseball, but there's a bunch of old players who weren't that good anymore. Now, they were able to rebuild their farm system very quickly with some international free agents. They made some very savvy trades, and now you see where they are. I mean, they're back to being the evil empire and for the foreseeable future. But it just speaks to, it's got to be all of those things. It can't just be spending a lot of money. It can't just be player development and scouting in international market. It's got to be all those things. And I think for the Orioles to get to that kind of a model where they have to be more cutting edge. And I think they've leaned way too heavily on experience, kind of tried and tested baseball men. And that's not to say that all of them have been bad. Buck Showalter's not a cutting edge guy, even though he's certainly aware of sabermetrics, and he uses some, not all the time, to the level that I would like to see as someone who considers myself a self-professed baseball nerd. But I think there's a balance there, and I'd like to see much more than this team going out and signing hiring a retread like a Ned Colletti, and we're just throwing that name out because that's the one name that's been noted as far as Ken Rosenthal reporting that not too long ago. But I'd like to see more cutting edge. I'd like to see stepping outside of the box a little bit more, and certainly not just dipping your toes, but diving into the international market. And you don't have to be number one, but my goodness,
don't be number 30.
right. Just be 16 but because that means you're going to be adding a lot more lottery tickets to your organization. And sure, you got to pick the right guys, and you need to have scouts worth your salt. And part of the issue is there isn't a very big international scouting staff because, why would there be when you're not spending on international talent? But just get more cutting edge. I think this game is changing in so many ways, and I think even though it's always kind of been, to some degree over the last 30 to 40 years, a more global game, and we've seen that gradually become the case more and more as time has gone on. But I think that's as true as ever about this game, and you're going to sit that out. I don't know what you expect is going to happen. I think you're creating such a small margin for error with the draft and trades and free agent signings and all those kind of traditional things that they still manage to do. Just get more cutting edge. And like I said, back to the fan interest part of it, get your game streaming. My goodness, it's 2018. How are you not streaming your games? That's the part that goes beyond the field, beyond the actual product itself. That needs to change. That's crazy in 2018.
He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. He covers the Orioles. My Dear Orioles series has begun at WNST.net with our first piece will be to the organization itself, to the franchise, not to Peter, just what does the franchise owe the fan base? That's my first question. You can have at it, as they say, at WNST.net. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. You can throw me an email, nasty at WNST.net. Certainly inspired out in the conversation of all of this stuff. I'll be chatting with lots of folks and writing letters this week to Peter Angelos and John Angelos and Lou Angelos and Brady Angelos and Buck Angelos and anybody else out there named Angelos. We'll start with them. But then I'm going to get to Dan Duquette and to Buck Showalter and to Adam Jones and to Chris Davis and to Zach Britton and to Masson and to 105.7 and anybody else out there that is feeding you a load of manure this summer as they give Manny Machado away here at the trading deadline. So, nasty at WNST.net finds me. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 at WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.